Welcome back. To bring you an inside look at what's happening at the Capitol this week, we turn to our On Politics panel. Michael Quinn Sullivan is the president of Empower Texans and Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. Scott McCown is the director of the Center for Public Policy Priorities. And Ross Ramsey is the managing editor of the Texas Tribune and editor of Texas Weekly. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. Any thoughts on our debate we just saw between Representatives Chisholm and Mike Villarreal?
Nice to be with you. Certainly, I think, particularly as we look at redistricting, we were chatting about it a moment ago, that it's going to be a very interesting session.
And that could really play up into how future budget cycles go,
That's
correct? Right. What do you think about that, Scott?
Well, undoubtedly, who you elect determines the approach you take to the budget, so that's exactly right.
It's going to be harder and harder for rural Texas to get representation in the budget as their representation shrinks in the legislatures.
Right.
Redistricting moves everything inside the triangle from, sort of Dallas-Fort Worth to Austin to Houston. Everything outside of that triangle is going to have a harder and harder time.
But interestingly, really, rural Texas and urban Texas share a lot of common interests. And I think in your last segment, Representative Chisholm and Representative Villarreal were kind of contrasting the differences, but in fact, on public education and health care, it's really urban Texas and rural Texas against suburban Texas. Right. And so I think the rurals will do okay, because I think their interests will lie with the urban districts.
Let's talk about these TV ads that your group, Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, have launched this week about education and money. Are you saying there is money there, but we still need to trim it?
I think first and foremost, we need to make sure on everything we do in state government, just like we do with our own personal finances, make sure dollars are being spent to specific outcomes, make sure dollars are being spent well and appropriately. When there are tough budget times, rather than starting the cutting in the classroom, that needs to be the last place that we touch. If we're going to make cuts, let's protect the classroom. That's where the actual general diffusion of knowledge our state constitution talks about takes place. When we see that right now in Texas we're spending $11,300 per child, but only about $5,000 of that makes into the classroom, we need to ask questions about how we're spending our dollars. Now, certainly need to be spending money outside the classroom, but it's a question of, do you really need to spend that much more outside the classroom?
And Scott, have you seen or heard about these TV ads that his group's been doing?
Yeah, I've watched them, and unfortunately they're very misleading. If you look at a school district's budget, 65% of the dollars go to classroom teachers. And then the next big category is classroom teacher aides, the aides that are actually in the classroom. Then you add on your special education teachers and your counselors and librarians. And then the auxiliary staff is incredibly important. Bus drivers to get kids to school. Over half of our kids are from economically disadvantaged homes. We're feeding them twice a day, breakfast and lunch. We have to have cafeteria workers. We have to have janitors. So what Michael's group's done is not present an operational plan of where you could cut. They've simply fashioned a slogan in an effort to justify some really horrible public education cuts.
But look, when in 99-2000, we had 61.8 of kids taking the SAT, and the SAT score is a 989. A decade later, we've doubled per pupil spending in Texas, and yet our SAT scores, fewer kids are taking the SAT, and the SAT score has dropped to 985. We're not spending our dollars effectively in the classroom. Until we spend dollars effectively in the classroom, all the stuff we do outside of it really isn't that important.
Ross, obviously teachers are not agreeing with what he has to say.
Well, I mean, the question is, where do you make the cuts? If you're gonna make cuts, there's a question there too. Or, if you decided to make cuts in schools, which we haven't done, as I understand it, since World War II. If you decide to make cuts in schools, where do you make the cuts? Most of the money in schools, it's a service operation. Most of the money is in payroll. Most of the payroll money is in teachers and teachers' aides, as Scott says. About 66%, 67% of what schools spend on payroll is spent on teachers and teacher aides. So at some point, if you're going to make cuts, you have to get into the teaching ranks. The question, I guess really the first question is whether you're going to make cuts. The Senate this week lessened the cuts by a huge amount. They started out saying we're going to cut $9 or $10 billion. Now they're saying we're going to cut $4 billion, which is better, but $4 billion is still a ton of money. And I'm not convinced at this point, with 2 months left in the session, that they're actually still going to cut public education at the end.
Well, I think in the end there's going to be cuts, but that we're going to have a balanced approach that includes using the entire rainy day fund and adding some new revenue. Because we're not spending $11,000 a year on kids in Texas on the operations of our school districts. That's not an accurate number.
For the TA it is.
Well, you're adding in capital construction, and you're not just looking at what is maintenance and operations for kids. We do not have a richly funded public education system. We have a growing population. We add like 90,000 kids a year. And we have an increasingly poor and increasingly English as a second language population. We cannot afford for our long-term prosperity to underfund public education and make what amounts to about, as proposed right now, about $12 billion in cuts. That is going to seriously hurt education, and that is going to seriously hurt our competitiveness going forward. And so we need to take a balanced approach, use that rainy day fund, look for some new revenue, and I think there's going to be cuts no matter what.
You know, look, I mean, we talk about balanced approaches, and let's talk about the balanced approach of like Beaumont Independent School District, which spent $61,000 on a F-350 luxury package pickup truck for the transportation director. Let's talk about a Lido Independent School District that has a covered, padded practice field for their football team. We spend so much money outside of the classroom. It's no wonder we're not seeing good academic results inside the classroom. Until we get a handle on what we're asking our schools to do day in and day out, we're never going to fund everything. And the balanced approach certainly hasn't helped California at all. California followed Mr. McCowan's advice. They increased their taxes. Now, Mr. McCowan hasn't identified any spending cuts, but they tried to cut their budget. They did a whole lot of tax increases, and they now have an even bigger budget problem than last time because businesses are fleeing California. The balanced approach to take is to reduce what we spend on non-essential services.
I don't know where Michael gets that California took a balanced approach. That's not true. And if we focus on Texas, what we can see is that we've got $9.4 billion in the rainy day fund. We need to use all of that, and we need to add some new revenue. There'll be cuts at the end, unfortunately. But we have 8,500 campuses. We have 5 million students. And a couple of anecdotes about misspending is not going to get you to $12 billion in cuts that we can take without seriously hurting public education.
I know we've been talking to people on chat this morning about the governor's involvement in all this, and I know he's been at some public events with your group, Michael, especially with that phone call that he had on Monday before, his people talked to other groups about the rainy day fund finally. Well, I mean, what does that say for our state's top leader to be siding with, such a polarized group like you?
Well, sure how polarized we are. You've got two-thirds of Texans saying they prefer spending cuts. They prefer legislators who are going to cut spending, not raise taxes. Folks are saying they want government to live within the taxpayers' means. They don't want wild-eyed increases in spending. So if, being with two-thirds of the population is polarizing, sign me up.
That's not what two-thirds want, Michael. What those polls show is while two-thirds may prefer, in theory, cuts, you ask them specifically, do you want to cut public education? No. Do you want to cut higher education? No. Do you want to cut health and human services? No. And
they say we don't want to increase taxes.
And they say we need to be using this rainy day fund. And I think a huge part of this battle is going to be over that $9.4 million rainy day fund. Billion, which Michael himself in 2009 said we needed to save and spend for the very problem we have now.
That's actually incorrect, Mr. McCown. You're misquoting. What we said was 2009 looked like it would be 2011 looked to be worse than 2009. What we're seeing right now, today, is that going into 2013, you're going to have $10 billion more in Medicaid cuts, $10 billion more that we don't have in the bank right now.
In 2009, Michael, you wrote, retaining the entire balance in the Economic Stabilization Fund, the Rainy Day Fund, is important so that the state does not have to cut essential programs or raise taxes in response to an anticipated budget shortfall in 2011.
I didn't say, though. You said I said we should spend it. I didn't say that, Scott. I didn't say we should spend it.
Well, you said we should save it in 2009
to be sure of what the future looks like.
For a response to a budget shortfall in 2011. And that's exactly what we have. You're welcome to put this on your website.
Have we cut all the essential services?
I think your readers would be interested.
Have we cut all the non-essential services? You said you could tie you down and tickle you.
That's right.
And you wouldn't identify any cuts.
Because
there's $17 to $20 billion in cuts in non-essential things you could do.
75% of what the state spends its money on is public education, higher education, and health and human services. You could cut everything else and not close this gap. We have a $27 billion shortfall for current services. And it's just unrealistic to say that we're going to leave billions, not millions, billions in the rainy day fund and have these terrible cuts to public and higher education, and not to mention what we're doing to health and human services. We're not budgeting a penny for Medicaid caseload growth.
All right, guys, I'm going to have to cut you off there. Unfortunately, great dialogue, though. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Ross.
Sure.
Appreciate it. And we'll be right back with Session 11.